Madison Square Garden is being played by Styx. On Come Sail Away, tens of thousands of fans are joining in on Dennis DeYoung's soaring vocals. The band appears to be on top of the world, the lights are flashing, and the vibe is electric. But backstage, there are icy looks, a quiet conflict, and a betrayed trust. DeYoung was the band's voice, but he was gradually losing his status as an outsider. Dennis DeYoung is now speaking up after decades of silence. His revelations about Styx are not only startling, but they also alter fans' preconceived notions about the group. In the beginning, Styx was a Chicago street dream come true. The Panazzo brothers, DeYoung, and his brother-in-law John Kirilowski set the groundwork. Then Tommy Shaw appeared. The spark that would ignite division and prosperity. DeYoung was visionary, intense, and focused. He was more than just a keyboardist. He was the architect of the band. He was drawn to large ideas, the dramatic, and perfection. However, this inventiveness quickly turned into a liability. Broadway was not what Tommy Shaw and James J.Y. Young wanted. They desired the excitement of classic rock and blaring guitars. Practices become battlefields. Decisions became arguments. The struggle that was going on behind the harmony on stage was concealed. Styx was on the verge of change and devastation in 1983. Dennis DeYoung was more than just a songwriter with Kilroy Was Here. His creation was a rock opera, a theatrical protest against conformity and censorship. Conceptual, dramatic, and heavily synthesized. It fulfilled all of DeYoung's dreams. However, Tommy Shaw and James J.Y. Young found it to be an unwaking nightmare. By creating intricate stage performances, writing dystopian characters, and insisting on theatrical acting from bandmates who never signed up to be actors, DeYoung put his heart and soul into Kilroy. Not only did Tommy Shaw feel creatively stifled, but he also felt stifled sunnily. He was once the group's rock and roll firebrand, but now he was wearing a costume. Under dazzling lights, miming out DeYoung's futuristic visions while speaking lines from a script. Backstage, the tension was explosive. Shaw apparently stopped recognizing the band he used to adore and became sullen and reclusive. He fell into a deep depression. Young became more and more irritated with DeYoung's fixation on control. Rehearsed arguments replaced what ought to have been rehearsals. Every show felt like a staged performance, and every sound check was like a battleground. The bond that once held them together had broken down into ego, fear, and bitterness. Fans were perplexed, critics were split internally, and Styx were on fire, but not in a good way. Offstage, they traveled in silence, stayed in different hotels, drove different cars, and hardly made eye contact. And as I mentioned, life happens occasionally. If you have dreams, they may need to change as you become older and more mature. You must if a particular desire isn't fulfilling you. Then everything blew up during the tour. Arguments became acrimonious. Physical altercations almost broke out. Creatively restricted and emotionally spent, Shaw could take no more. He left not only the album but the band as well. It was a quick and vicious split. The purpose of Kilroy Was Here was to take Styx to a new level of creativity. Rather, it split them in two. The band's disintegration was signified by the album that represented DeYoung's artistic aspirations. DeYoung's extraordinary vision, which previously made Styx bold and distinctive, turned him into a target. Dennis DeYoung stood by himself in the aftermath, neither as a leader nor as a hero, but as a man who was held accountable for ruining the same thing he helped create. The excitement among supporters was overwhelming by the late 1990s. People were eager to see the original lineup, especially Dennis DeYoung, return to the stage, and rumors of a Styx reunion were spreading. He had, after all, been the original visionary and the band's heart and soul. DeYoung genuinely thought it was time to restore the fraternity, and he was now well enough to return. He hoped that he waited, but what transpired would ruin any faith he had left in the people he had previously referred to as friends. Tommy Shaw and James J.Y. Young decided behind closed doors to continue Styx without its founding voice, rather than answering the phone or lending a helping hand. Furthermore, they brought on a new frontman who could mimic Dennis's distinctive voice and theatrical movements, and sing every note of his songs. It had nothing to do with invention. It has to do with replacement. It was corporate, calculating, and frigid. And that was like a dagger to DeYoung. The fans were taken aback. The headlines seemed deceptive. The man responsible for Styx' sound, identity, and greatest successes was no longer welcome. When the band started touring under the name Styx and played songs that were all written or co-written by DeYoung, including Babe, The Best of Times, and Come Sail Away, without mentioning the man who composed them, the treachery was complete. What about DeYoung? He watched it all from the sidelines, by himself at home, still recovering from his illness, and yet holding on to the naive belief that they would call and act appropriately. Instead, he was viewed as a burden and a liability. A name they had outgrown. He made an effort to connect and comprehend, but there was no space for harmony or desire for a solution. In the 1980s, what had begun as artistic disagreements had evolved into a passionate blood feud. Contends that legal challenges quickly followed. Mints over songwriting credits, performance rights, and name usage. And further layer of resentment was added with each lawsuit and lawyer's letter. Interviews became bitter. In the press, terms like delusional, control freak, and ego were used. The harm could not be undone. Therefore, DeYoung was forced into the background as the band moved forward with a new period and a well-manicured image. In real time, his once loud and brilliant legacy was being rebuilt with silence instead of truth. The betrayal was more than simply a professional one for DeYoung. It would haunt him for decades and was intensely, painfully personal. DeYoung was caught up in a silent battle against his own body as well as his former comrades, while Styx' name kept packing venues. His life came to a horrifying halt in the late 1990s when he became ill with an unexplained ailment. He developed a light sensitivity that made it impossible for him to record, play, or even leave his home without feeling ill and confused. Months went by literally in the dark. Lights off, blinds closed, music turned down. That's when it occurred. The remaining members of Styx made a choice that broke him when he was at his weakest and most exposed. Without him, they continued on. He wasn't simply abandoned. Someone took his place. The machine continued to run while he lay in recovery, emotionally and physically shattered. His identity, voice, and face were marginalized and cast into the background, and the pain was far more profound than any sickness. The momentum-driven music industry didn't wait for him. Agents ceased making calls. The promoters abandoned him. Locations canceled their individual plans. Once a mainstay on marquee, his name was now deemed too confusing and dangerous. In his own story, he went from being the main attraction to a ghost. It wasn't only a professional treachery. It was so intimate. He was treated as though he were disposable by those who had formerly been like brothers. Additionally, he was compelled to observe from the sidelines as the Styx brand flourished in his absence. Without appreciation or acknowledgement, his legacy paraded around. Depression began to set in. Emotional collapse, bewilderment, and fear weighed heavily on his marriage. He allegedly refused to get out of bed on certain days. Once his savior, music now causes him sorrow. It felt like reopening wounds to even play the piano. But it's not like DeYoung breaks gently. As time went on, he started to retaliate through art rather than litigation or resentment. Slowly at first, he started writing once more. He created stories that mirrored the heartache he experienced, tried his hand at theater, and wrote new songs. Creativity emerged from suffering. Betrayal led to resiliency. The scars persisted, though. He still carried the weight of being removed from what he had created with his own hands when he spoke in public years later. Even if his condition has subsided, the memories of being abandoned when he was at his most vulnerable and shattered has never fully recovered. Styx pushed DeYoung away, but his fire didn't go out. All it did was redirect. However, the same passion that made him a master on stage turned against him in private. His battles extended into boardrooms, production meetings, and even his own house after Styx was no longer his battlefield. Record company executives attempted to control his solo image, and he fought them. He refused to moderate his dramatic edge when they asked him to. According to reports, one executive described him as uncontrollable. Producers on a variety of projects, including stage shows and studio albums, frequently left feeling exhausted and demoralized. He gave Per the same motivation and obsession. Not everyone was able to keep up with the love in every note, lighting cue, and outfit. DeYoung wanted to redefine himself when he jumped into musical theater in the 1990s and early 2000s. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, his rock musical, became a cult favorite. However, rumors circulated about demanding rehearsals, rewrites, and DeYoung's resistance to guidance. His vision was admired by several. For some, it was intolerable. Frequently, collaborations ended in dissatisfaction. Compromise felt like a betrayal to DeYoung. The disputes continued outside the stage entrance. Long-suppressed grievances about money, inheritance, and professional decisions started to come to the surface inside his family. Arguments centered on loyalty, business choices, and who actually backed him. He became completely consumed by his intense preoccupation with leaving a lasting legacy and being remembered properly. It occasionally took precedence over everything else. One moment he could be affable and charming, the next icy and combative. Close friends started to distance themselves. Some ceased answering their phones. Others discreetly withdrew because they couldn't bear to see him grow more and more alone. A guy battling ghosts was visible to those who stayed. The silence from once trusted allies, the industry's apathy, and the betrayal from Styx. The more he shouted for attention, the more isolated he became. DeYoung found himself alienating the very people who had supported him in his quest to shape the tale of his own life. The fight for musical appreciation had evolved into something more. It was a war worth remembering, hearing, and seeing. Furthermore, it had a price that no gold record could cover. Dennis DeYoung is at a peculiar crossroads in his life, revered by generations of fans but forever disregarded by the band he helped form and co-found. His solo albums are still praised. Weddings still feature his ballads. His voice is instantly recognizable, incapacitating, and devastating. Nevertheless, it seems as though Styx never existed when he is on stage now. There is a sea of personal sorrow behind the adulation. DeYoung lost brothers in addition to a band. A chilling machine replaced what had once felt like a family. Former co-creators Shaw and Young now appear to be emotionally distant, unreachable ghosts from a previous existence. They are silent and unresponsive. Just quiet and the pain of erasure, no apology, no closure. However, he was not broken by the betrayal. Not entirely. In addition to retreating and grieving, he also produced. He channeled his suffering into narrative, symphonic tours, solo endeavors, and music. He is a man attempting to recover not only his identity but also his legacy, and every note he sings now is infused with a deeper reality. He started Styx in a basement in Chicago. He gave it voice, passion, and drama. And even if others might carry on under that name, they are unable to remove the imprint he left on each album, song, and note. Now that time is running out and the stage lights are going down, DeYoung is talking freely. Everything is coming out, the exile, the betrayal, the sorrow. For truth, not retaliation. Because legacy is more important than endings when it comes to the ultimate curtain. Furthermore, Dennis DeYoung will not allow quiet to rewrite his